mic check, please.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings.
I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brazier.
My name is John Gordon. I'll be your host.
And I'm your host, Katie Burke.
Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited Podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America. We bring the resource to you, the DU Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings. Joining me in studio today is newly elected Ducks Unlimited President, Chuck Smith. Chuck, welcome to the Ducks Unlimited Podcast.
Great to be here. Thank you.
We wanted you to come on here today and really just introduce you to our listeners. I mean, you go to so many different DU events, traveling around the country. Some of these people are probably going to run into you, so it'd be great to, for them to know you before they see you at some of these events. But we'll do the same thing we do with every guest on the podcast. I want you to go ahead and just introduce yourself to the DU Podcast listeners and just kind of let people know who you are, where you're from, and how you became the DU president.
Well, I'm a native Memphian, which works out well because, as everyone knows, Ducks Unlimited is headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee, in a fabulous facility. Hopefully everyone has had the chance or will have the opportunity to visit headquarters. It's very inspiring to see how we do business and meet our people and so on. I basically got involved with Ducks Unlimited many, many years ago when I was simply asked to join a committee for Ducks Unlimited, and I said, sure, I'd like to. What's Ducks Unlimited? So they explained it to me. This is like in the 80s. They explained it to me. And so my first job at an event was handing out little brochures and programs to people who would come to the event talking about conservation and so on. And that was my first exposure to Ducks Unlimited. And then from there, I went on to, eventually host an event, put on a Memphis dinner. Then I was an area chairman. Then eventually I was elected Tennessee state chairman. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I was elected as a regional vice president and served on the board in that capacity for a few years. And then I took a few years off, okay? And about 6 or 8 years ago, my friend George Dunklin, past President George Dunklin, approached me and said, "Hey, Chuck, would you like to get involved back with Ducks Unlimited?" And I said, "Sure. What you got on your mind?" He said, "Well, we have a longtime secretary, Steve Reynolds, who many of you may recall that name. He's been our secretary for 17 years. He's wonderful. He's stepping down, and we need a new secretary. Would you like to do that?" And I said, "Sure, I'll do that." So I was secretary for 4 years, I guess. Then I was elected first vice president, and then most recently I was elected president. So it's quite simply just started as so many of you start, saying, "Sure, I'll do that, step up and volunteer and help out with an event." And I've never regretted 1 minute of it. It's been wonderfully rewarding and just a great experience for me.
And you are a lifelong waterfowl hunter as well.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. I came back and I just fell in love with it. I've always loved hunting ducks, and being located in Memphis with close proximity to that Mississippi Alluvial Valley Flyway in Arkansas and Mississippi, there's lots of hunting opportunities right here where we are. And I can't help but feel like that contributed a little bit to Ducks Unlimited relocating their national headquarters to Memphis from Chicago. They'd been in Chicago many, many years, and lease ran out on their property up there, and the city of Chicago wasn't real impressed with Ducks Unlimited, so they began looking for a new headquarters. And we had a great benefactor here in Memphis named Billy Donovan, who was a Ducks Unlimited guy and a Memphis guy. And he approached Ducks Unlimited and made a very compelling offer for them to locate their headquarters in Memphis. And they said yes, and that was about 25 years ago, I think. So it's been a wonderful relationship with Ducks Unlimited staff, being welcomed into the Memphis community, and it couldn't have turned out better.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. That's funny that you mentioned that you are a Memphian, and it's the first time, I think, as far as I can remember, that, the president is from Memphis. So how do you think that benefits you as far as there are many days people just run into you walking down the hallways here. So how do you think that benefits you?
Well, it benefits me because I'm able to, the headquarters is 6 miles from my house, okay? Mm-hmm. So I go out of my way not to come out here all the time because I don't want to get in the way. I'm a volunteer, and staff has lots of work to do, and they don't need me getting in the way. But if I need to speak with Adam Putnam, our CEO, or Dan Thiel, or Nick Wiley, our Chief Operating Officer, about some specific event, I just soon get in the car and come back and sit across the table from them and speak to them person to person. As I say, I try not to arrive unannounced. I certainly try not to overstay my welcome. I don't want to be seen as a hindrance to what everybody's trying to do, because these guys at DU work a heck of a lot harder than I do, and the last thing I want to do is keep them from doing their work.
Yeah, and so what exactly, other than, you mentioned getting involved in the events and probably the people, but what really drives your passion for Ducks Unlimited? What is the main motivator? I
think the conservation work that Ducks Unlimited does, and when I got involved with it, there was not a whole lot of awareness about the good work that Ducks Unlimited did. We sort of knew, most ducks habitat in Canada, that's where they came from. We spend money in Canada, but there really wasn't that much emphasis on it. And I would say everybody involved as a volunteer at that time with Ducks Unlimited, 90%, 95%, were involved in the event and fundraising system. Everybody that volunteered for DU volunteered to put on an event, help with the raffle, help with the auction, pick up prizes, sell dinner tickets, and so on. There was development, too, with trying to enlist life sponsors and so on. But that was the extent of what being a volunteer from DU entailed. What's different today, and this is exciting for me, what's different today is that Ducks Unlimited is uncovering a lot of new potential revenue streams which allow us to do more conservation, which create more ducks. We do a lot of work with legislators in Washington, D.C. We actually have an office on the Hill staffed by professionals whose job is to call on Congress people and their interns and talk about legislation which directly impacts conservation and therefore directly impacts us. So if we see a water bill coming along, DU loves water. We want to be in on that and offer our input on it. And the good thing about it is we have lots and lots of scientists and PhDs and really smart guys who understand all that, and they can go to these legislators and say, this is a good idea, here's why, or this isn't so good, have you thought about this, here's what's going to happen. And I think that's a part of DU that was new to me, but it's going full speed now, and that's very exciting to see that happen.
You've been involved with DU, like you said, since the 80s. But when you became president, is there one thing that kind of jumped out to you, or really just once you got on the board level, really? You probably saw a lot of stuff, but what's the one thing that you didn't know about Ducks Unlimited that you learned once you got much more involved at the volunteer level? Well,
since I became president 3.5 months ago, which seems like a really long time, I've been in a fair amount of traveling to various dinners. I've been to the Charlotte dinner and Minnesota and all over attending dinners, and it's just amazing to see the level of involvement and enthusiasm and passion that people all over the country have for this organization and the real lifeblood of what we do. You talk about a company and you talk about, well, cash is, the lifeblood. You got to have cash, and I agree with that. But for Ducks Unlimited, a major part of what we're doing is the work of our volunteers, and that's kind of been a theme of my presidency is, we need to bring on volunteers, and we need to bring on some young volunteers. I'm not quite as young as those guys are bringing on now, which is good. I got to tell you, during COVID, we got kind of whacked, like a lot of people did, and most specifically, we got whacked in that we would host over like 4,400 events nationwide, and that went to zero almost overnight when we couldn't gather. And hosting events and putting on the DU dinner in your hometown was a great recruiting tool for volunteers. We'd always ask people, would you like to volunteer and help with DU with the next event? Well, that ground to a halt. Yeah. So we weren't really signing up new volunteers. So our emphasis now that we've sprung back after COVID is really focusing on recruiting new volunteers, and not only in the event and fundraising system, as I mentioned earlier, But in all things DU does, for example, conservation. We need volunteers of conservation. We need public policy volunteers who can talk to legislators in their state legislation whom they would know and talk about a project in the area that DU would be interested in getting involved in, whether it's habitat for nesting habitat or whether, in my area, it's wintering habitat all up and down the Mississippi River and in the wetlands in Arkansas, which is fabulous duck country, but trying to promote conservation easements, for example, to protect land forever. So that's gotten to be a big part of what we do. In addition to the fundraising, which of course got us where we are today, we'll never abandon that. But there's other sources of income which will allow us to do more conservation.
Cool. And you pretty much answered my next question, which was going to be kind of what's your legacy of your presidency, but I think you just answered that. You mentioned you go to a lot of events, and I think one thing about Ducks Unlimited is everyone who's a part of it, even if you're not a volunteer, if you just attend an event, when they say Ducks Unlimited, you're thinking of this like banquet-style dinner or something like that. What is, just kind of looking back, like what is your favorite DU event kind of memory that you've had over the years?
There have been some great events. This event I went to most recently in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's one of our top 10 events. They raise in excess of $400,000 one night with an event, and I attended that as president. And they also had Sonny Perdue attend that, former governor of Georgia, former secretary of agriculture, a great friend of the Ducks, and he attended and made a speech, and just the excitement in that room with what he did. And then they had this heck of an auction, and I mean, they were blowing it out. They're I'll give you an example. There's a item we have in the event package this year. I think it's like a Busch Light neon sign that lights up, and they had an event. Adam Putnam just told me in his hometown in Florida, they sold that goddamn Budweiser Busch Light sign for like over $2,000.
Wow.
And I'm embarrassed to tell you how much it cost us, but
hey, that's what fundraising's all about.
It was a high margin item, let me tell you. Yeah. So everybody's just so enthusiastic and positive, and it just makes you feel good to walk in there and see everybody just wanting to have a good time and to produce a good event and to make some money for the Ducks. Nobody's trying to do anything, no hidden agendas or anything. We're all pulling in the same direction, and it's incredibly refreshing. It's just, I encourage everyone to get involved with DU however you can.
Awesome. And the last thing before I get you out of here, I just want to give you the opportunity to, sounds like your messaging is kind of leaning towards you're trying to motivate more volunteers, obviously. That's the goal here. If you could stand in front of all of Ducks Unlimited's volunteers and just give them one good message, what would it be?
Well, when I was president in New Orleans at the National Convention, I sort of did that. And the one good message quite simply starts out, thank you for what you do. We couldn't do anything without you guys. We have, at one point, we had 55,000 volunteers producing over 4,000 events nationwide. And you tried doing that without 55,000 volunteers, and it would just be all but impossible to do. So I would encourage you to continue to stay involved, and I would encourage you to bring your friends with you to an event and get them to, drink the Kool-Aid with us. And I tell you one reason why DU is so successful. Last year we raised over $275 million, which is a nice sized company. But we did it with an 84% efficiency ratio, which means 84% of that $275 million went to habitat on the ground, to move dirt, to create wetlands, to make more ducks. And 16% went to administration and so on. And one reason we're able to do that is because, we got 55,000 free employees who are working for us on those events and doing stuff for us all the time. So that's really the secret sauce is those volunteers that we have, and we hope to build on those ranks going forward. As I say, we're a little depleted during COVID, but we've come back strong. The event system this year, I just saw a report right before I came on. It's strong. It's very good. Attendance is good. People are spending a little less money per person than previously, but I'm certain that has something to do with inflation, economy, et cetera, et cetera. But that's going to be over with at some point, and we're going to spring back strong and be better than ever. So overall, enthusiasm is super high for Ducks Unlimited. I would thank all the volunteers out there that give of their time, is the most precious commodity we all have, give of their time to do good work for the Ducks.
Awesome. How excited are you for duck season?
I just saw that there was a little bad weather in the Dakotas.
Yep.
I think the high every day for the next week is 25 degrees, and that suits us very well down here where I am in Arkansas. I've been told by these smart PhD scientists that ducks will not move until you cover up their food with snow and ice for a week. And I think that's happening. So hopefully we'll be welcoming into some warmer, sunnier, very hospitable climates in Arkansas and Mississippi and in Missouri and Tennessee. And I'm going to tell you, the last few years, we didn't have that. We didn't have that warm weather. And I saw a report that Dr. Brasher put out about the duck season, and he had all this scientific graphs and data on drought and warm weather, and that's not good for ducks.
Nope.
But this year we have freezing cold weather up north. In Memphis over the weekend, it's 32 degrees both nights.
Yeah.
That's amazing for November for us. So better days are ahead. Load up.
That's right. That's perfect. Hey, Chuck, I appreciate you coming on. This has been great, and we'll have to get you back in here, do some kind of regular updates especially as the season progresses here.
Count me in, and maybe we could have a few beers next time we do one.
There you go. Sounds
All right.
good.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my guest, Ducks Unlimited President Chuck Smith, for joining me today. And I'd like to thank Chris Isaac for putting the show together and getting it out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us on the Ducks Unlimited podcast and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the ducks. Stay tuned to the ducks.